Gospel today, there's a lot that we could point out, but I'm going to take this course with you today, and it's like this. A phrase or a sentence that I've mentioned to you over and over again. Our lives, excuse me, are made up of simple acts, one after another. Proof positive? Did you have to get up today? Otherwise you wouldn't be here, right? When it gets a little colder, it's going to be harder, though. Okay. And before you came out and faced the public, you probably washed your face and did some other things, right? All these little acts. Well, the tradition that has come down through our holy people who've taught us about our spirituality. Spirituality is our ability to live what we believe day after day. That's what spirituality is. Those people have told us that even the simplest of acts are important because our lives are made up of a lot of that. Simple acts. I know one that's kind of important is that you keep your home clean. Is that correct? And I use this phrase carefully, somewhat orderly. Okay? That's all I can attest to, the somewhat orderly part. All right. But we do that because it's important so that we keep things straight because we know we have obligations, bills to pay, people will come over, all of those things. But what happens to us in the noise of everyday life, the news that God gave us through the Ten Commandments begins to slip away. And what happens is our resolve to follow them begins to be chipped away. And let me share with you a couple of things, and you know these, we've talked about it before. When you go to work, and I want you to know that as a hospital chaplain for 24 years, just like the rest of you, I got up in the morning, drove to the hospital, went in like everybody else did, time cards, the whole bit. So I'm telling you that I know what this is about. It wasn't long before I entered the floors and began to visit patients and staff that I began to hear what is called scuttlebutt. Do you know what I'm talking about? There's another uglier word for that called gossip. Do you get that word? All right. Now it's funny. That was more alive than the newspapers that were they sold in the store. So when we get to work, there's a tendency for this to begin to slide away, that we forget about what we heard here. And we enter into gossip or scuttlebutt or any of those kind of things. And some of it is very, very unpleasant. And the juicier it is, the higher the activity that goes on. Is that true or not? That activity begins to get ratcheted up. What happens in that case is that what is being told is then amplified to a certain extent. So what is somewhat ordinary becomes extraordinary. All of us know what that process is. We begin not to follow what God said to us about not bearing false witnesses. So the commandments begin to recede. The culture in which we're living in works away at us, and then we can find ourselves joining in. Another thing, anonymity. When we're out on the road traveling, and I've talked to you about this over and over again, I see really strange behavior. And the strange behavior is like this. There are lots of persons who drive their car who think that the roads are personally owned by them. Personally owned. Therefore, you have to follow their rules. Now, in that situation, the word love your enemies comes to mind to me. Okay? Love your enemies. And that's part of the challenge. When we get in that anonymity, that kind of situation, again, it chips away at our resolve to follow the commandments. And what about that commandment? The base, we know. We're to be people who love others. And it doesn't say, when you get to work and people are talking, no, you don't have to follow the commandments. When you're driving your car and you meet a lot of people out there who own the roads, you don't have to pay attention to that. You can just let them have it. Now, I want to tell you another situation. Have you ever watched how people in the store go to which cash register? Now, I'm old-fashioned. I do not use the electronic ones, because no matter how I try, I end up with an item that I can't find the right thing to do with it. And so I know what I want to do with it. I want to throw it. Okay? So what I do is I get in line, and I told the people that it's a good thing I shaved before I came, because it looks like I'm going to have a beard before I leave here. Okay. Now, that tends to chip away at how you feel about things. But I've watched this, how people pick which cash register they go to. And some of the ways in which we do that indicate we know something about the person who runs the cash register, or we think we know. So they'll avoid this one to get in this line. I'm almost 80 years old and been shopping, for a long time. I can never pick the right line. I've never done it. I figure it's probably something I did when I was a kid that I'm still paying for, but I never get in the right one. Now, as we stand in line there, no one comes up to me and says, "Tell me about how you love God." Nobody asks me that. Now, I hear God's name, but it's not used correctly. It's not used correctly. You get all of what I'm after. In those cultural situations, our life, we begin to give up what we know is right and correct. Because the commandments teaches us to be respectful no matter where we go. Not only that, it says, be aware of the alien. Be aware of the person who has been sidelined, and give them attention. Dearest family and friends, we've shared this together. You know very clearly what it is that I'm talking about. And that's why I ask you to recommit when you get up in the morning to say, I'm going to do one loving act after another, because I know from hearing in church, and I know from the gospel, that everything that we do has value. And the value of that is that we can continue to love more through these simple acts, because our life is filled with it. Today, the main message: be careful and watch how in certain situations our respect for others can be diminished. We can enter into conversations that are not helpful, stuff that should go in the garbage heap and not be talked about. The second thing is what I've already mentioned. Our life is filled with little things. When we know that and know that God is present there, that even these little things are important, especially when we do and choose to make one loving act at a time.